Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Kashmir to highlight developmental projects. We'll discuss that. How South Korea became a cultural superpower and how do microplastics end up in the arteries of people. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. China slams the US, hails ties with Russia. Foreign Minister Wang Yi accuses the US of trying to suppress China, claims Beijing's actions in the South China Sea are reasonable. China's top diplomat also warns Taiwan against seeking independence. In India, the Election Commission warns Congress leader Rahul Gandhi. The caution comes after Gandhi's jibes at Prime Minister Modi. The poll panel asks the opposition leader to be careful in his public remarks, says there will be stern action for those violating the model code of conduct. Thousands of passengers in Germany face travel misery as rail and airport workers stage new strikes over pay. Lufthansa's ground staff on a nationwide strike. Rail workers also on a 35-hour walkout. Industrial action has hit Germany hard in recent months. Russia adds Garry Kasparov to its list of terrorists and extremists. The chess grandmaster is a fierce critic of President Vladimir Putin. He has repeatedly spoken out against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Kasparov, who lives in the US, called it an honor to be part of this list. In the US, Alabama passes IVF protection law. A court ruling had led fertility clinics at the state to halt IVF procedures. The law provides immunity to an individual in case of death or damage to an embryo. In February, the Alabama Supreme Court had ruled that frozen embryos should be considered children. And last month was the warmest February on record globally. It was the 9th straight month of historic high temperatures worldwide. Europe saw its second warmest winter on record. Global warming and the El Niño climate pattern are responsible for this spike in temperatures. We start with the war in Ukraine. It has reached Africa. In the country of the Sudan, the capital of Sudan is Khartoum, and Ukrainians and Russians are clashing there. Sounds hard to believe, but it is true. The war in Ukraine has a new battlefield, the Sudan, where Kyiv has put boots on the ground. But how did Ukraine end up in the Sudan, and why did it get involved in the first place? The conflict in the Sudan has been brewing for months now, though it doesn't get the kind of attention that Ukraine and Gaza get. This fighting has been on. More than 13,000 people have died in the Sudan. More than 8 million people have been displaced. Another 25 million people desperately need humanitarian aid. So it is a messy affair. And with Ukraine's involvement, it's getting worse. The conflict began in April last year. Kyiv entered the picture around August, courtesy this man, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the de facto military leader of the Sudan, at war with his former friend and ally, who is leading the rebel forces. They're called the RSF. At one point, these rebel forces were gaining the upper hand. Al-Burhan was on weak footing. He needed someone to rescue him. Guess who stepped up? Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Al-Burhan called up Zelensky for help, and Zelensky could not say no because of their history. Al-Burhan has been a friend to Zelensky. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Al-Burhan supplied weapons to Kyiv. Look at this photograph. That's a Ukrainian soldier with a Sudanese mortar round. Al-Burhan was helping Zelensky. So when the Sudanese leader sent an SOS, the Ukrainian had to respond. He dispatched commandos from Kyiv, nearly 100 of them. Their first mission was to save Al-Burhan. The rebel group called RSF, or Rapid Support Forces, were closing in. They're led by this man, General Mohammad Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti. He wants to replace Al-Burhan, and this power struggle is what sparked the war in the Sudan last year. Al-Burhan had a narrow escape. Ukraine's forces helped him out, first to get him out of Khartoum, and then ultimately to Port Sudan, which is a city on the Red Sea. It was a safe zone for Al-Burhan. His forces controlled Port Sudan, so that's where he went. Later, he would meet Zelensky. This was in September 2023 at an airport in Ireland. Back then, it was painted as an impromptu meeting where the two leaders discussed Russia-funded armed groups, aka Wagner, the Russian group of mercenaries, a private army sponsored and controlled by the Russian state. Now, Wagner is like a common enemy for Zelensky and al-Burhan. Wagner mercenaries are fighting in Ukraine. They're also fighting in the Sudan, in both cases against the regime. In the Sudan, they're supporting the rebels. So at that meeting in Ireland, an alliance was born. The Ukrainian commandos stayed back in Khartoum. After saving the general, they conducted multiple missions. And their goals were quite simple: drive the Sudanese rebels out of Khartoum and fight the Wagner soldiers from Russia. That's what they wanted to do. Many missions were conducted, mostly at night. You see, Hemedti's rebels did not know how to fight in the dark. The Ukrainians had an advantage here. Their commandos could operate at night. They had night vision gear. So they exploited the weakness of the rebels. In one mission, Ukraine's commandos fired at an apartment building. It served as a base for the rebels. The Ukrainians raided it. They deployed drones and dropped bombs. So you get the idea of what they've been up to. Are they still operating in the Sudan? We cannot confirm that. What we do know is this: Kyiv sent multiple teams to Khartoum. It also supplied weapons and other military equipment. What's in it for Kyiv? They've opened a new front with Russia in the hope of draining Russia's military resources and putting a strain on their finances. The Sudan has rich gold reserves. Wagner forces have been smuggling out Sudan's gold. Reports say $4 billion worth of gold is unaccounted for. In 2022, Russia operated 16 flights out of the Sudan. 16 flights. These planes are said to have been used to ship out gold. And Ukraine could be aiming to stop this supply. But while it tries to deplete Russia's resources, this strategy cuts both ways. Does Kyiv have the wherewithal to continue this campaign? Earlier, it had a blank check of sorts from the West, an almost unlimited supply of weapons and military equipment, but that's not the case anymore. American aid is stuck, and Europe's efforts to fill the gap are woefully inadequate. Now it turns out that Ukraine has been fighting two wars. So will the West support it? Were they kept in the loop when Ukraine entered the Sudan? Were there funds diverted in this fight? Zelensky may have some explaining to do. Our next story is about Bitcoin. It is surging, and how? Yesterday it hit a new record. One Bitcoin was priced at $69,000. This was an all-time high for Bitcoin. Bitcoin sustained this price level only briefly, but the milestone is not our story. It's the momentum. It's been steady for a while. The question is, what is driving this rally? Usually this kind of surge happens due to heavy buying when a large number of investors start investing in a particular asset and they do it in large quantities, or when wealthy investors start pouring in big money. And the case of Bitcoin is no different. It's going up because of an influx of large investments. Which brings us to the question, who is buying Bitcoin? Big investors in the United States. Investment firms have been at it for a while now. They've been trying to bring Bitcoin-related products. In January, they got a green light from the American regulators. A group of firms got the nod. They were allowed to introduce a new class of investments. These are called ETFs, Exchange Traded Funds, ETF. Now, these funds work like mutual funds. Expert fund managers run them. They collect money from investors and invest them directly into financial assets like stocks, or in this case, Bitcoin. If you're an investor, you can buy into these funds, ETFs, with small amounts of money, meaning you can indirectly own Bitcoin, also a number of other digital currencies. You can own them through this fund, ETF. So now big names have entered the Bitcoin game, the likes of BlackRock, Fidelity, and Grayscale. Reports say they have bought hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins, and that's what's causing this price surge.
I think this is classic supply and demand. Demand is booming. We had the spot Bitcoin ETF approved in the US just over 6 weeks ago. And since then, those ETFs have accumulated 4% of all the Bitcoin there is in the world just in 6 weeks. Just to put that in perspective, that's proportionally about twice the size of the gold ETFs, which have been out there for a lot longer.
Now, what does that mean for people like us, the average investor? What does it mean for them? Early adopters of Bitcoin will celebrate. Their investments have grown many-fold and they've earned some well-deserved bragging rights too. There is institutional investment in Bitcoin now. Mainstream players are entering this space. Notable players are buying Bitcoin, and that amounts to acceptance. That means that Bitcoin and other digital currencies are here to stay. But I must say, these investments are not for the faint-hearted. Digital currencies like Bitcoin can be volatile assets. Look at the trajectory. Bitcoin emerged in 2009. It wanted to be the currency for the internet, one that is not controlled by any bank, by any central or reserve bank, by any country, government or institution. It was not supposed to be controlled. Its operations are decentralized. Now, Bitcoin is built on the principle of blockchain. It's like a huge public ledger where every Bitcoin transaction is recorded. Everyone using the Bitcoin can see that transaction. So it makes any kind of cheating quite hard. When someone transacts using Bitcoin, computers around the world verify and authenticate it. So transactions cannot be fabricated. Now, since then, since 2009, many more cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have emerged. They're called cryptocurrencies. But there is a fundamental problem with them. There is no underlying asset, no asset that decides the price of these currencies. There are no gold bars which back our traditional currencies. So this market, the cryptocurrency market, runs on a pure demand and supply model. When there is more demand, the price goes up. When the demand shrinks, the price falls. And it falls quite dramatically. Consider what happened in July 2022. Bitcoin's price dropped below $20,000. The global outlook was gloomy. There were fears of a recession, so investors turned towards safer assets. And just see how wild the fluctuation has been. In July 2022, one Bitcoin was worth $19,000. Today, the price is well over $60,000. That's a jump of more than 3 times in less than 2 years. It could fall again when the markets turn bearish. So if you're thinking about investing, do remember this. This is no quick money scheme. Think your investment through, consult an expert, and exercise caution. For our next story, let's talk about a bamboo plant. You do know what it looks like. A bamboo tree has a stout trunk, very strong roots, and incredibly flexible branches. For Vietnam, the bamboo tree is an inspiration. It's inspired their foreign policy. Hanoi calls it bamboo diplomacy. The principle is quite simple: strong fundamentals, but a very flexible approach. Just like the bamboo plant. It's dynamic and it's been quite successful. Global powers are making a beeline for Vietnam, the latest being Australia. It's upgraded diplomatic ties with Hanoi.
Elevating our ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership today places Australia and Vietnam among each other's most significant partners. It reflects our shared ambition for the future.
We are confident that with the upgrade of our bilateral ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership, Vietnam and Australia have entered a new chapter in the history of bilateral relations with a very substantive, effective and sustainable items of cooperation across the board.
Comprehensive strategic partnership. That's what they're calling it. The two countries will cooperate in a lot of sectors. But the most important bit is this: both nations will open an annual dialogue on critical metals, the likes of lithium, copper, cobalt, and other rare earth minerals. And this is quite significant. You see, critical minerals are crucial for tech sectors. They're used to make everything from smartphones to EVs. Australia is a major producer of critical minerals, and Vietnam has some of the largest untapped deposits of critical minerals. So it's a win-win for both.
Working together as comprehensive strategic partners, I am confident that Australia and Vietnam can rise to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow.
Australia and Vietnam have shared ties for half a century now. There have been some differences, but nothing major in the last few decades. Vietnam is Australia's 10th largest trading partner. Canberra is Hanoi's 7th largest export market. They're both part of multiple agreements, and they are priority partners in foreign policy. The two nations were already close, so why the upgrade now? For Australia, it's about China. It wants to move away from Beijing. It wants to diversify its supply chains. And what better option than the rising Asian tiger? Vietnam has the infrastructure, it's a regional power, and it has the political stability that is needed. That makes it the newest business hub. Big companies are shifting base there, shifting their supply chains to Vietnam. The likes of Dell, Google, Microsoft, and Apple. Apple already produces millions of AirPods in Vietnam. It also plans to move key iPad engineering resources to this country. In 2022, foreign investment in Vietnam hit a decade high. This is all part of the de-risking or decoupling from China that the world is attempting. So Canberra could not have had a better choice. As for Vietnam, it's another shining laurel for its bamboo diplomacy. The world is getting more and more divided. There are 2 wars and multiple conflicts and brewing tensions. Amid all of this, Vietnam is walking a tightrope. Look at its roster of top partners: the United States, China, India, South Korea, Japan, Russia, and now Australia. Some of these countries do not see eye to eye. Yet they're all making a beeline for Vietnam, to work with Vietnam. US President Joe Biden visited the country last September. They upgraded ties. They announced closer cooperation on chips and minerals. And remember, the US and Vietnam once fought a war that America lost. And 50 years later, an American president landed there to sign deals. Soon after that visit, Xi Jinping landed in Vietnam. China is Vietnam's largest trading partner, and the Chinese leader was there to offer more. The 2 nations signed 36 cooperation documents. All in all, a very successful visit. Meanwhile, Vietnam has also upgraded ties with Japan and South Korea. It also enjoys close ties with Russia, ties that were developed during the Soviet era. Vietnam is still a major buyer of Russian weapons. So it's truly a mixed bag. Vietnam has it all. US, Russia, China, India, they all want to boost ties because of the regional significance of Vietnam. It's a manufacturing powerhouse, a crucial asset in global supply chains, and it's flexible thanks to its bamboo diplomacy. For now, that flexibility is paying off. To the United States now, it was a rough weekend for Donald Trump. It's been a rough time for him, in fact. He may be the Republican presidential candidate. He's won big in the Super Tuesdays. He's the only Republican face now in the race. But does he remember that? I ask because Trump seems to have trouble remembering things. A few days back, he looked lost. He referred to his wife, Melania, as Mercedes. He confused Obama with Joe Biden. And when it came to his rival, Trump even appeared to endorse Biden for a moment. So what's going on with the former US president? Are gaffes now a staple for presidential campaigns? Our next report tells you.
So every time I do that, or I'll say, our president, Barack Hussein Obama, now I do that because, that makes a point. Do we understand that, right? Because a lot of people say he's running the country. And Putin, has so little respect for Obama that he's starting to throw around the nuclear word.
That was Donald Trump, former US president and current Republican presidential candidate. If you weren't following US politics, you would imagine he was fighting Obama in the polls. But Trump is up against Joe Biden. So why is he talking about Obama? It's a gaffe. One of his many this election season. He's confused Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. He's called his wife Melania Mercedes. In Michigan, he told voters to vote on November 27th. The state's primary was on February 27th. At one point, he even seemed to endorse Biden. Trump is nonchalant about his gaffes. He says they're intentional. But is that really the case? Trump is 77 years old. He writes with a Sharpie. He sometimes seems lost on the campaign trail. So questioning his cognitive senses is not completely out of line. But maybe Americans are just used to it. Because on the other side is Joe Biden. The US president is 81 years old, and he too has had his share of bloopers.
We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate.
If you didn't know any better, you would think gaffes are a campaign strategy. something to rally the voters. But the more you look into it, the more you realize it's just that they are old men. Men who are looking lost, stumbling on stage, and mixing up things too often. Joe Biden is 81. Donald Trump is 77. Compare that to the average age of US presidents, just 55. Around 76% voters are concerned about Biden's age. 48% think Trump is too old to be president. After all, the median age of Americans is 39 years. Retirement age in America is 66 years. Presidents are public servants at the end of the day, so technically they are hired by the people. So why can't people demand younger presidents? But demand or not, Americans hardly have a choice here. They may dream of the good old days, of American presidents who could walk and talk simultaneously. And there were plenty. Gerald Ford once modeled for a magazine. John Quincy Adams kicked off his day with a swim in the Potomac River. Ulysses S. Grant was arrested for speeding on a horse. Herbert Hoover invented a sport to stay fit. John F. Kennedy loved his sports. It was often difficult to keep him away from the field. Barack Obama was a gym rat in chief. The 44th US president was a fitness freak. But now you have two elderly men who are stumbling their way to the presidency.
Now let's turn to the world of tech. A new storm is brewing. A fight has begun between the world's second richest man, Elon Musk, and a company he helped found, OpenAI. Musk fired the first salvo a week ago. Last Thursday, he filed a lawsuit in San Francisco. He accused OpenAI of betraying its foundational mission. Musk says OpenAI was supposed to help humanity. Instead, it has become a profit-making subsidiary of Microsoft. Musk blames the other founders of OpenAI for this. He says, and I'm quoting, "They set the founding agreement afloat." He's referring to CEO Sam Altman and OpenAI's president, Greg Brockman. So Musk is suing both these men and OpenAI itself. He's suing the company too. Elon Musk claims that he wants to put the open back in OpenAI. As in, he wants the technology to be open source, meaning anyone can legally use the code and go about building their own AI models. In his typical style, Musk has been taking digs at OpenAI via memes and posts. He calls it closed AI, just to drive the message home. But Sam Altman and his gang are not amused. They decided to hit back yesterday through a blog post. They've released a number of emails dated between 2015 and 2018. These emails reveal a different story. It seems Elon Musk is not upset about OpenAI's profits, but he's angry that he won't get a share of them. Turns out that Musk himself wanted OpenAI to become a for-profit firm. The blog post says, and I'm quoting, "In late 2017, we and Elon decided the next step for the mission was to create a for-profit entity. Elon wanted majority equity, initial board control, and to be CEO. In the middle of these discussions, he withheld funding." That sounds like arm twisting. OpenAI is effectively saying that Elon Musk was trying to blackmail them. He was withholding funding and asking to become CEO. When that failed, he suggested merging OpenAI with Tesla, which is quite hypocritical, considering that he is crying foul about OpenAI working with Microsoft now. Now, some of you may agree with Musk's view. You may think that since he was OpenAI's biggest donor, he had the first rights to all its profits. But the blog post disputes that too. Here's what it says, and I'm quoting again. "In total, the non-profit has raised less than $45 million from Elon and more than $90 million from other donors." They don't get into the split. So Musk still could have been the biggest donor, but he did not seem to have the controlling share, which may explain why he eventually walked off. Elon Musk left OpenAI in early 2018 to build his own AI startup within Tesla. He basically founded an OpenAI competitor and used Tesla to bankroll it, which was a smart move, or it would have been had it worked out. Today, Elon Musk has an artificial intelligence firm called xAI. It has created a language model called Grok. But it's not really considered path-breaking. So Musk could be hoping his lawsuit helps his new company too. Because remember, if OpenAI is forced to become open source, Musk can use their technology to boost his own for-profit company. What is the likelihood of any of this happening? Probably low, because of the emails OpenAI has just leaked. One is particularly damning. OpenAI's former chief scientist wrote this: "As we get closer to building AI, it will make sense to start being less open. The open in OpenAI means that everyone should benefit from the fruits of AI after its birth, but it's totally okay not to share the science." And Musk responded to it. He said, "Yup." That proves that either Elon Musk doesn't really read emails or he knew that the open part wouldn't last. It makes his lawsuit seem disingenuous. Whether courts see it that way is another way, though. We'll have to wait and see how this latest tech feud plays out. Our next story is from West Africa, a region rife with coup-hit countries and countries that face terror insurgencies like Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. Their elected governments were struggling, so the militaries overthrew their leaders. Then they began fighting the terrorists. But they haven't had much success. Last year, casualties increased by 38% in terror-related incidents. And this discredits the juntas further. Remember what they said when they took power. They justified their coups, saying they will fight terror more efficiently. But they've been failing. So now the juntas have regrouped and they've launched a joint task force. Here's our report.
West Africa is a hotbed for terrorists. It is home to numerous groups and factions. You have the best known ones, like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, or the Islamic State Sahel province, and of course, Boko Haram. Then you have the up-and-comers, like Ansar ul-Islam, or the rapidly growing Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin. This area of West Africa and the Sahel has been called the world's new center of terrorism. So you can imagine how tough it is to fight the myriad of militants. Many have tried to quash them. There have been a number of alliances and organizations devoted to this. You once had the G5 Sahel. It comprised of Mauritania, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali. They were aided by their former colonial overlord, France, and other Western powers. But this group proved ineffectual, and some of the militaries got tired of waiting for success. So you had a slew of coups in the region, and 3 of the G5 have broken off into a separate group: Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. They now call themselves the Alliance of Sahel States. All 3 nations have seen coups in recent years. Mali in August 2020 and May 2021. Burkina Faso in January and September 2022, and Niger last July. The militaries there decided to overthrow the Western-aligned democratic governments. They said the governments were a hindrance in the fight against terror. The militaries wanted to take matters into their own hands, and they have done so, to the detriment of security in the region. Terror attacks are up. Deaths are up by 38%. This is according to a US-based crisis monitoring group. They say there were 8,000 terror-related deaths in Burkina Faso alone last year, and the trend has continued. A few days ago, 170 people were killed in Burkina Faso. Authorities say the victims were executed. This was after terrorists attacked 4 villages in Burkina Faso's Yatenga province. About half the country is still outside the government's control, and the situation isn't great in other allied Sahel nations either. So what are they doing about it? Forming a joint force, apparently. This force was announced yesterday by Niger's army chief. He said it would be operational as soon as possible. But we don't know how it relates to the overall alliance. This force may just be a part of the Alliance of Sahel States, the group's coalition force dedicated to fighting terror. If that is the case, why did it take so long? The alliance was formed last September, and 6 months later, they're still working out the details. The fact is, these countries had more options before the coups. They had help from more neighboring nations. They had Western support, and support from a UN mission. None of them managed to eradicate the terror groups. Now, the coup coalition promises to do it with less soldiers. Striking out alone isn't the best option. Mending ties with neighbors may reap better rewards, because so far the juntas seem to be out of their depth.
Vantage continues after a short break.
धीरे धीरे करके मेरे साथ लगभग 100 बंदे सर जुड़ गए जो ये मधुमक्खी का काम करते हैं। 100 जोड़ने के बाद धीरे धीरे मैं सर आगे बढ़ा और 2023 में मुझे सर एफपीओ मिला और एफपीओ के मिलने के बाद अब हमारे पास सर कोई टेंशन ही नहीं। अब तो हम एफपीओ के थ्रू मार्केटिंग लिंकेजेस एक स्टॉल लगाने पर सर हमें एक स्टॉल में हमने 1 लाख रुपए कमाया और वो भी सर डिजिटली। हमें दिक्कत होती थी पहले जब एग्जीबिशंस में जाते थे 1 लाख रुपए जेब में कैसे घूमते थे सर, क्योंकि आज हमारा यूपीआई सिस्टम है। आजकल हमारी 98% पेमेंट डिजिटली हो रही है, तो डिजिटली ट्रांसफॉर्म होने के बाद सर उसके साथ हम भी आगे बढ़े, देश के साथ हम भी सर आगे बढ़े। थैंक्स सर।
नाजिम जी, जब पढ़ाई करते थे तब क्या सपना था?
सर जिस टाइम पे मैं 10वीं जमात में था तो मेरा सपना, पहले घर वाले मुझे बोलते थे आप डॉक्टर बनो, आप इंजीनियर बनो, तो मैंने घर वालों का मैं नहीं सुनता था। मैंने सोचा सर मैं अपना दिल का सुनूंगा। तो मैं जब 2 बक्सों के पास गया था तो मैंने सोचा नहीं, मुझे डॉक्टर और इंजीनियर में इंटरेस्ट नहीं है, जो मुझे खुद लगे मैं वो करूंगा। और धीरे धीरे के सर करके मैंने अपना मधुमक्खी का काम संभाला।
परिवार आपकी क्षमता को जानता था, आप डॉक्टर बन सकते थे, लेकिन आपने वो रास्ता नहीं चुना और आपने एक प्रकार से स्वीट रिवॉल्यूशन, हमने ग्रीन रिवॉल्यूशन सुना है, हमने व्हाइट रिवॉल्यूशन सुना है, आज मेरा कश्मीर नाजिम जैसे युवाओं के कारण स्वीट रिवॉल्यूशन का नेतृत्व कर रहा है। बहुत बहुत बधाई। अच्छा नाजिम जी, आपकी इस पहल में जैसा आपने बनाया, सरकार की योजनाएं रही, लेकिन शुरुआत में शायद सरकार में योजनाओं का लाभ लेने में दिक्कत आई होगी, या सरलता से आपको समझ आया, मिलता गया?
सर 2018 की बात अगर मैं करूं तो मैं पुलवामा, बारामूला, गांधरबल, अनंतनाग सब डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स में गया सर, क्योंकि मेरी तड़प थी कि मैं इस मधुमक्खी के काम में काम करूं। मगर कहीं पे मुझे उस टाइम पे सपोर्ट नहीं मिला। मैं एक बंदे के पास गया, लास्ट में डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ एग्रीकल्चर के पास गया और उन्होंने मेरा हाथ थाम दिया और सफर आगे बढ़ता रहा।
नाजिम जी देखिए, मधुमक्खी का ये
Now let's focus on Egypt. It's making headlines thanks to its crumbling economy. Yesterday was a big day for them. Egypt was promised a big loan, $8 billion. By whom? The IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Earlier they were promised $3 billion. So this is a major jump, an increase of $5 billion. But when it comes to the IMF, there's always a catch. Conditions always apply. And this case was no different. Egypt had to do something in return for the extra $5 billion. It had to stop artificially supporting its currency. That's the Egyptian pound, their currency. Cairo let go of its control over the Egyptian pound, and in exchange, the IMF agreed to give it a bigger loan. As you can imagine, Egypt's currency took a tumble. Its value fell by about 2/3. It went from about 30 Egyptian pounds to the US dollar to around 50 pounds per dollar. The crash has alarmed the people of Egypt.
Changing the foreign currency rates affects us in every way. Once the merchants knew the rate has changed, the prices rose immediately.
Is everything in our life linked to the USD? All our problems are now attributed to the USD. What about other goods that we should buy with Egyptian pound? What happened to the Egyptian pound? It is worthless now.
Despite these dire reactions, the Egyptian government is hailing this as a victory.
Thank God today we signed the agreement between Egypt and the IMF. I want to reiterate that the deal comes in line with policies of structural reforms for the Egyptian economy prepared by the Egyptian government.
We're at the beginning of the right course for the country to be economically balanced and strong, with the efforts of everyone and the understanding of everyone.
Egypt's Prime Minister and Central Bank Governor both seem happy. They're pitching this as a great reform, despite what it could mean for imports. Let me explain. Egypt depends on imports to survive. For example, it is the world's largest importer of wheat. It needs to bring in about 12 million tons of wheat every year to feed its population of 110 million people. Now, imports are expensive and they're paid for in US dollars. So Egypt needs foreign currency at reasonable rates. That's why it had pegged the Egyptian pound. It helped rates keep them steady at about 30 pounds to a dollar for almost a year. This should have kept prices stable. But that's not what happened. Egypt's inflation was officially at around 30% in January. So clearly keeping the currency rate fixed was not working for them. And this is because people were ignoring the official rate. There is a black market dollar rate in Egypt. Foreign currency was hard to get at the official prices, so traders bought this currency in the black market and passed on the difference to the customers. This is partly responsible for the high prices in the country. Foreign currency at official prices was hard to come by for a number of reasons. Tourism was down, fewer ships were passing through the Suez Canal, expensive imports means dollars are spent there. And all this meant that Egypt's government did not have dollars to spare. People could not buy them at the official rate. They had to buy dollars in the black market, and this culminated into Egypt's present crisis. So now Cairo has decided to stop controlling the pound. This will help the official and black market rates converge, and they hope prices will go down as a result of this. Egypt's central bank has also increased interest rates by 600 basis points or 6%. They hope this might also help curb inflation.
Regarding the Monetary Policy Committee's decision to increase interest rates by 600 basis points during the extraordinary meeting today, the aim is containing the inflation rate and speeding its decrease to approach a single digit in the medium term.
Single-digit inflation is an ambitious goal, but Egypt has given itself a system shock. It will take some time to see the results, but hopefully it's a step in the right direction. Our next story is from India. Today, the Indian Prime Minister visited Kashmir, his first trip to the valley after 2019 when the special status to Kashmir was revoked. The Prime Minister has been travelling to Jammu. In fact, he was there last week. But today's visit to Srinagar is a first in 5 years. The visit has captured global attention because it is a statement of intent. Since 2019, the narrative around Kashmir, especially in the Western press, has been around the security of Kashmir and the deployment of troops. Also the communication disruptions. But Kashmir has moved on, and Prime Minister Modi's visit is an attempt to shift the conversation, to highlight the progress that Kashmir has made in the last 5 years. The Prime Minister used the opportunity to talk up the development projects in the valley. During his visit, he announced another 53 projects worth over $700 million. This visit also comes ahead of India's upcoming general election. Our next report has more details.
It couldn't have been timed better. General elections are on the horizon in India. The dates could be announced in a matter of weeks. So the Prime Minister's visit to Kashmir couldn't have come at a more opportune time. But beyond the politics, PM Modi's visit had a deeper significance. This is his first visit to Srinagar after 2019. When Article 370, the provision which gave Jammu and Kashmir its special status, was revoked. Earlier, Jammu and Kashmir was a state. Through a Reorganisation Act, it was turned into a union territory. The changes bore the Indian Parliament's stamp of approval. It also passed the legal test. In December last year, India's Supreme Court upheld the abrogation. The Indian Prime Minister's visit comes 2 months after that order, and he was on a special mission, here to win hearts.
और मैं 2014 के बाद जब भी आया मैंने यही कहा, मैं ये मेहनत आपका दिल जीतने के लिए कर रहा हूं.
The outreach was visible. Before his address, the Prime Minister met the locals. Many of them were beneficiaries of government schemes designed to uplift the economy of the valley. This was the Prime Minister's main pitch. The development of Kashmir has been a key focus area for the Prime Minister. Since 2019, his government has pushed hundreds of development projects. With this visit, the PM tried to further this agenda. He announced another 53 projects worth millions of dollars.
मोदी अपने परिवार को विश्वास देकर जा रहा है कि जम्मू कश्मीर के विकास का यह अभियान किसी कीमत पर नहीं रुकेगा.
Among all the initiatives, there's one that stands out: the integrated development project of Hazrat Bal Shrine. PM Modi inaugurated it today. The project is part of a big outreach to the local community. The Hazrat Bal Shrine is near the famous Dal Lake. It holds deep significance for the Muslims. Over the years, the shrine has preserved the sacred hair of Prophet Muhammad's beard. It is frequented by locals on Friday for mass prayers. On special occasions like Ramzan, the shrine witnesses a large influx of visitors. The entire site has been transformed. The entrance courtyard has undergone a revamp, with new and modern facilities being added. Today, the Prime Minister declared Srinagar is now a hub for India's tourism industry, and these projects are now contributing towards the redevelopment of the valley.
Origin stories are powerful. They tell us why we are the way we are. Humans, superheroes, villains, everyone has an origin story, as do nations. And today, we will tell you one. The origin story of a cultural mammoth called South Korea. Its creative rise came from its lowest point. After the Korean War of the 1950s, South Korea was emerging from abject poverty. But by the turn of the century, it had come a long way. It was going to become an electronic success story. That's when South Korea suffered a second blow. The economic crash of 1997. Seoul was forced to ask the IMF for a bailout, a loan of $60 billion. It is still known as the Day of National Humility. Collective sacrifices were made to pay off the debt. Ordinary citizens donated wedding rings to help the cause. This was an emotional low point. That's when Seoul made up its mind. It wanted to turn things around. South Korea needed national rebranding. So the government took cultural identity and turned it into an exportable commodity. And Hallyu was born. Hallyu refers to the Korean wave. The phenomenal growth of Korean pop culture, from K-pop to K-beauty, film to food. Today, culture is one of South Korea's largest exports. It has helped the nation become Asia's fourth biggest economy and cemented its credentials as a cultural superpower. So how did South Korea pull this off? Are there lessons for other countries here? That's what we'll discuss tonight. But first, a primer on Korean pop culture. Gen Alpha may cringe at this, but for late millennials, this was an iconic moment. Gangnam Style. This earworm of a song wriggled its way across the world, making history as the first YouTube video with 1 billion views, leaving its viewers galloping and asking for more. This breakthrough smoothened the road for K-pop, or Korean pop music. And today, this industry is massive. Bands like BTS and Blackpink have conquered the world. BTS reportedly adds about $4 billion to the South Korean economy every year. K-pop is practically the biggest part of South Korean content industry, which hit a record high in 2021. It was worth $12.4 billion. It dwarfed earnings from home appliances and vehicles, something South Korea was once popular for. But things do not end with K-pop. Korean dramas and films are big business as well. 4 years ago, Parasite won an Oscar. 3 years ago, Squid Game became the most watched show on Netflix. Now, Korean gold rush has arrived. Netflix is investing $2.5 billion in South Korean projects. Disney and Apple TV are commissioning more Korean shows, so everyone wants a piece, and especially when it comes to Korean food. Korean cuisine is penetrating global markets. It is worth $77 billion. Meanwhile, K-beauty is the latest rage. Hordes of tourists are flocking to South Korea to buy cosmetics like snail mucin and face masks. The K-beauty market is expected to be worth $18 billion by 2030. South Korean culture is a big hit. But how did the country do it? Through a near-perfect marriage between public and private effort. You see, after the IMF crisis, the then Korean president threw money at the content industry. This laid its foundation. So credit where it's due. But just as the government pushed funding, private players stepped in. They poured billions of dollars into creative industries, and this boosted the industry. Of course, like most relationships, this one hasn't always been hunky-dory, like in the 2010s, when a conservative government was in power. It blacklisted singers, actors and writers and deprived many big names of funding. But in most cases, the government takes a backseat. It provides loans, tax breaks and investment, while private players get the creative control. And now the Korean wave shows no signs of stopping. Many say the next big thing is literature. There is growing demand to learn the Korean language. Language courses are seeing a rise in enrollments from overseas. South Korea wants to tap into this too. It wants to export stories, share them with the world, which makes us wonder, don't we all? Every nation has powerful stories. Most nations would want to share them. The key is to figure out how. As they say, heroes are made by the path they choose, not the powers they're graced with. Our last story today is about microplastics or microscopic plastics. These are tiny polymer fragments, about 1,000th the width of a human hair, and these plastics are everywhere, from the clothes we wear to the water we drink, so they are entering our bodies. And they are so small, they can invade our cells. These plastics can enter human blood vessels as well. A new study says this is alarming. People with microplastics in their arteries are twice as likely to have a heart attack or stroke. They're also more prone to an early death. So what can we do about it? Our next report tells you.
Microplastics are everywhere. They are tiny plastic fragments. They range from less than 5 millimeters to 1 micrometer in size. In other words, their average size is around 1,000th the width of a human hair. Owing to their tiny size, microplastics have infiltrated every part of the planet. They've been found in lakes, on the beaches of uninhabited islands, in seas across the planet. There are about 24 trillion fragments of microplastics in the upper regions of the oceans. Microplastics have been found buried in Antarctic sea ice as well, also inside the bodies of marine animals. But they aren't just in the water. Microplastics are spread in soil. They are in the air. So, unwittingly, we consume tiny fragments of plastic, be it from the food we eat, the water we drink, or the air we breathe. How much? Shockingly, we inhale a credit card's worth of microplastics each week. And what happens to these microplastics in our bodies? These are minuscule bits, so they migrate through our tissues. They can invade the cells. From here, they enter the bloodstream. Yes, there are microplastics in our blood. So far, these plastic particles have been found in the lungs, livers, bowels, mother's milk, and placenta. But now, microplastics have been found in arteries. Specifically, carotid arteries. These are the blood vessels on each side of the neck. They carry blood to the brain. Sometimes, microplastics settle in these arteries, and this is alarming. People with microplastics in these arteries are twice as likely to have a heart attack or a stroke than people who have none. They are also twice as likely to die from any cause over the next 3 years. This is a breakthrough discovery, and it raises a series of important questions. For starters, are microplastics now a cardiovascular risk? The new study has just scratched the surface. There is not enough research to know the extent of harm microplastics can do. So far, we know that these particles interrupt cellular processes, they release harmful chemicals, and they can impede organ function. But such instances are rare. Secondly, can we reduce exposure to microplastics? It is going to be challenging, if not impossible. According to a study, 1 liter of bottled water has 240,000 plastic particles. Now, you may avoid bottled water, but can you avoid all beverages in plastic bottles, or food that comes in plastic containers, or the air you breathe? It is going to be difficult, but small measures can help. Like thoroughly washing vegetables, reducing plastic use, or packaged food. Even switching to natural fibers like cotton can help. The fact of the matter is, in the world that we live in, plastic is everywhere. It is impossible to eliminate the risk. But we can take precautions and hope for the best. Because Barbie was wrong. Life in plastic is hardly fantastic.
Vantage continues after a short break.
नया क्षेत्र होता है और आप बहुत आसानी से कर सकते हैं और उसके कारण फसल को भी बहुत फायदा होता है। यानी मधुमक्खी एक प्रकार के आपका फार्म लेबरर के रूप में भी काम करती है। तो आपके मधुमक्खी के इस काम के कारण किसानों को समझ आ रहा है कि आप उनकी भी मदद कर रहे हैं।
सर बिल्कुल, जब भी हम आसपास आज मधुमक्खी डाल रहे हैं, हमारे घर वाले बोल रहे हैं आपको जमीन चाहिए हम दे देंगे, आपको कोई सपोर्ट चाहिए हम दे देंगे। आपका ही फायदा नहीं जा रहा है बल्कि हमारा भी फायदा हो रहा है। इसलिए जब भी हम राजस्थान में जा रहे हैं, हम कोटा में जा रहे हैं सर, हम यूपी में जा रहे हैं, वहां हमें जमीन मुफ्त में दिया जाता है ताकि आप यहाँ पे लगाइए, हमारा फसल भी बढ़ेगा, आपकी आमदनी भी बढ़ेगी।
नाजिम जी, आप इतना सारा करते हैं, एक सुझाव मैं देता हूं और आप ऑनलाइन भी करते हैं। सेंट्रल एशिया में जो हनी होता है, उन देशों में हनी, क्योंकि वहां भी ये हिंदू कुश पर्वत है सारे, वहां भी हिमालय की तरह ही सारी पर्वतमालाएं हैं, वहां की हनी का एक प्रकार अलग है और मैं मानता हूं कि आप ऑनलाइन उसका स्टडी कीजिए। दूसरा, वे लोग अलग अलग टेस्ट के लिए अलग अलग फूलों के बीच में अपनी मधुमक्खी का पालन करते हैं। उसके कारण जो हनी मिलता है, उसकी स्मेल, उसका टेस्ट उस फ्लावर जैसा मिलता है, तो उनको बहुत बड़ा मार्केट मिलता है। मैं चाहूंगा, भारत में भी बहुत प्रयास हो रहे हैं, उत्तराखंड में भी बहुत सफलतापूर्वक प्रयास हुए हैं और नाजिम जी आपने भी जरूर ऐसा किया होगा।
सर हमारे जो कश्मीर का हनी है, बाकी जो स्टेट्स का, न्यूजीलैंड का, जो अदर कंट्रीज का हनी है, हमारे भारत का हनी इस टाइम पे नंबर 1 है। हमारे कश्मीर का एकेशिया पूरी डिमांड है सारी वर्ल्ड की सर। हमारे एकेशिया सर पहले 400 रुपया केजी था, इस टाइम पे वो 800 रुपए, 1000 रुपए तक पहुंच गया।
नाजिम जी, आपसे बात करके बहुत अच्छा लगा। आपने जो पहल की उसमें बहुत स्पष्टता और साहस चाहिए और आपको स्टूडेंट लाइफ में इतना विजन आपका क्लियर होना, ये अपने आप में बहुत बड़ी बात है।
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In North Korea, Kim Jong-un observed military exercises after brandishing a machine gun during the practice. In Mexico, protesters smashed open a door of the country's presidential palace, and an incredibly rare grey whale was recently sighted swimming off the coast of Massachusetts. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1902, the Madrid Football Club was founded by a group of fans. It soon began to make a name for itself in Spain. That club is now known as Real Madrid. It's one of the most successful football clubs of the 20th century. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Jamwal. Ladies and gentlemen, our top story comes from Jammu and Kashmir, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi led a mega outreach to the Kashmir Valley, visiting it for the first time since the abrogation of Article 370. Now, Prime Minister Modi took the stage amid thunderous applause and cheers at Srinagar's Bakshi Stadium, calling for a Viksit Kashmir. The Prime Minister trained his guns at the Opposition National Conference and the PDP, referring to Jammu and Kashmir as a victim of Parivarvad and corruption. Prime Minister Modi also condemned dynasty